Hey guys, tonight we begin with a fork. Not a sword, not a scandal, just a silver fork. Because in Victorian England, using the wrong one could cost you your reputation, your dinner invitation, and possibly your will to live. This was a world where sitting, sneezing, and even buttering toast came with moral implications. A world where the upper lip was stiff, but the social panic was feral. You're about to enter a society where rules existed for everything except how to be happy. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step out of the carriage and immediately feel something is off. It's not the cobblestones, though they do seem to resent your existence. It's not the air, which smells like damp roses and class anxiety. No, it's your gloves. You glance down, subtly, hoping they've transformed mid-transit into something more appropriate. But no, still cream-colored, still slightly pearl-buttoned, still tragically daytime. The footman doesn't say a word, because he's been trained not to feel feelings, but you can tell. He sees the gloves, and he knows. You walk into the entryway like someone trying to smuggle contraband pride. The butler bows just slightly too quickly, which means he's clocked your social failure but hasn't decided whether it's fatal. You pray the lighting in the drawing room is dim enough to pass for tactful mourning or at least moderate shame. Inside, everything is velvet. The kind of velvet that's so thick and dark it seems to muffle your thoughts. Candles flicker in a way that would feel romantic if you weren't actively in crisis. A parlor maid offers to take your coat, and you hand it over with the confidence of a person who does not currently know if their elbows are offending someone. Then comes the moment of truth. You have to remove the gloves. You're expected to. A lady is removing hers beside you, sliding them off with practiced delicacy, like she's peeling the skin of a fruit she grew herself. Her gloves are black, evening gloves, morning appropriate, socially hygienic. You hesitate. Your cream gloves feel radioactive. There's a coat rack nearby. You consider leaving them there, unceremoniously abandoning your fashion felony like a cursed relic. But no, the host has spotted you. He's approaching. He is wearing a cravat that could land a small aircraft. Behind him, a woman with a fan sees your gloves and makes a noise like a teacup shattering inside her chest. You smile, foolishly, hoping your expression can scream, "Surprise," as though someone else dressed you in a dark carriage with malicious intent. The host greets you with something just north of warmth, but not quite kindness. He doesn't mention the gloves. He doesn't have to. His eyebrows stage a minor play on his forehead about them, and the audience is everyone. You're ushered into the drawing room, and every woman here seems dipped in shadow. Lush, serious fabrics, jet beads, the color spectrum of respectful grief. You look like a slightly glamorous ghost who got lost on the way to a brunch. A gentleman nearby is talking about tariffs, and someone laughs in a way that sounds like they're trying not to be implicated. No one is drinking yet. They're waiting, probably for you to realize you've already been socially executed. You find a chair near a dying fern and try to blend into the upholstery. Your gloves sit in your lap like a small, smug betrayal. A woman approaches you, smiling thinly. Her dress has ruffles that could hold state secrets. She sits without asking and begins, gently, to destroy you with kindness. She compliments your hair, your posture, your family name, all with the tone of someone delivering condolences. And then, casually, as if discussing the weather, "Oh, how brave to wear light gloves this evening. So sunny." The word sunny is not praise. It's a diagnosis. You stammer something about laundry mix-ups, a rogue maid, a confusion with travel trunks. She nods like someone listening to a child describe their dream. You both know it's over. Dinner is announced and everyone rises like slow, judgmental smoke. You're seated next to a man who appears to be made entirely of tweed and suspicion. The cutlery arrangement in front of you looks like a miniature fencing match. You try to focus, try to recalibrate, but across the table, someone whispers, and you know, it's the gloves. Even now, tucked under your napkin like a buried scandal, they have power. They are speaking for you, and they are saying all the wrong things. You last exactly 7.5 minutes before excusing yourself under the pretense of a headache, which feels true in spirit. You flee through the hall of mirrors and regrets, out into the night, back to your carriage, where at last you can breathe like someone who no longer has to pretend to be acceptable. Inside your reticule, your gloves sit quietly, innocent, terrible. Tomorrow, you will buy black gloves. You will buy the blackest gloves in London. You will burn the cream ones and never speak of them again. But tonight, they win. The chair looks harmless, comfortable even, gently upholstered in something floral and vaguely beige, like the personality of a duke. It's near the fire, slightly angled toward a cluster of conversation, and empty. No one warns you. No one leaps forward dramatically to save your life. You simply assume that if furniture exists, you may interact with it. So you sit. The silence that follows is immediate and physical. It doesn't just fall, it pounces. 4 heads turn in perfect unison, like owls attending a seance. The lady nearest you lowers her teacup with such precision, it sounds like a threat. Someone coughs, and the cough is shaped like the word scandal. You don't understand at first. You scan for damage. Did you knock something over? Misplace a shoe? Is your petticoat showing an inappropriate level of ankle-based ambition? But no, everything seems intact. Everything except the social fabric of the room, which you've just torn through like an enthusiastic goat. Then it dawns on you. You sat, without being introduced. And worse, you sat next to someone you haven't even looked at sternly across a ballroom. A stranger, possibly a viscount, possibly married, possibly worse, unmarried and available. You try to rise, subtly, as if levitation is still on the table, but the damage is done. The hostess has seen. She doesn't approach. She doesn't need to. Her look from across the room travels with the weight of an entire empire's judgment. You could swear the wallpaper dims in response. A man nearby clears his throat and mutters something about propriety, which is how Victorians say, "You're done here." The woman you sat beside hasn't moved. She's staring straight ahead, frozen like a tragic oil painting, as though acknowledging your presence would render her unmarriageable by desert. Her fan lies limp in her lap, having clearly given up. You stand, awkwardly. Try to reposition yourself in the room as if nothing happened, as if perhaps you were never actually sitting and are merely in mid-curtsy. No one buys it. A maid walks past you without meeting your eyes. That's how you know it's serious. Introductions aren't small talk here. They are contracts, shields, parchments of approval signed by someone of higher rank who vouches, on their honor, that you are not a threat to polite society. Without one, you're just a rogue organism on a velvet chair, and your presence is interpreted less as a guest and more as a hostile incursion. You try to drift toward the punch bowl, the safe zone, but even there, the air has changed. Someone whispers the word forward. Another says improper. You sip punch that tastes like diluted judgment and pretend not to notice the slow evacuation of people from your vicinity. One gentleman nearby is pretending to inspect the wallpaper. He's very interested in the wallpaper. The hostess finally makes her way over. She smiles, the kind of smile usually reserved for dental discomfort and war negotiations. She asks if you're enjoying yourself, which is Victorian for explain yourself before I call your mother. You open your mouth to speak, but she continues without pause, gently repositioning your body with the power of proximity. Before you know it, you're standing alone near a plant, which may be symbolic, though you hope it's not. Eventually, someone approaches, an older woman. Her expression is not cruel, but it is exhausted. She murmurs, "Next time, wait for an introduction, dear," and moves on without waiting for a reply. It's the kindest thing anyone has said all evening, and it lands like a prayer, or perhaps a eulogy. Later, much later, when the evening is ending and people are gathering their gloves and grievances, you thank the hostess again. She says nothing about the chair, or the sitting, or the breach of ancient trust, but her "do come again" arrives with a tone that suggests neither desire nor intent. You leave with your spine unusually straight and your heart beats somewhere in your ears. The chair remains, unbothered, a trap disguised as comfort. Tomorrow, it will claim another, but tonight, it was yours. The table is a battlefield, and you're holding the wrong weapon. It didn't start that way. You sat down with a perfectly normal pulse and the vague, misguided hope that dinner might simply be about eating. But this is Victorian England, and the dining room is where reputations are sliced thinner than the lamb. There are 9 forks, possibly more. They fan out on either side of your plate like a glinting silver rib cage, each one whispering secrets about you, who you are, where you came from, what your father did, or more importantly, what he failed to do. This isn't dinner. It's a psychological exam, and you've brought the wrong pencil. It starts innocently enough. A servant presents you with a plate containing a suspiciously sculpted pile of something French. You smile politely, give a soft nod of approval like you know what it is, and reach casually, confidently for what seems like a reasonable utensil. You don't realize you've made a mistake until it's too late. The fork is just a bit too wide, too rounded. The handle has a mother-of-pearl inlay, which you now know, signals fish in this household. Unfortunately, the thing on your plate is not fish. It's asparagus, and you've just used the fish fork to stab it with the energy of someone trying to blend in. Across the table, your aunt's hand freezes mid-air, her sherry glass hovering in suspended judgment. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. One arched eyebrow delivers the full eulogy of your social standing. The man beside her, some cousin twice removed and thrice dull, glances at your fork, then your face, then your fork again, like he's trying to solve a crime. You attempt to recover, but it's already in motion. A chain reaction of side eyes and slight gasps. A young woman 3 seats down actually sighs. You'd apologize if you knew the proper protocol for admitting to cutlery-based humiliation, but the rules here are opaque and numerous. And also, possibly in Latin, the butler, trained in crisis management, glides past you without making eye contact. That's how you know. It's serious. He's seen worse. Someone once buttered their roll with a fish knife, but this, apparently, is in the same league. You retreat from the fish fork like it's been contaminated, trying to discreetly swap it for something else. But in doing so, you graze the dessert spoon, sending it clinking against the plate in a sound that could only be described as social carnage. Your aunt clears her throat. She says your name softly, almost lovingly, which is how you know she's planning to cut you out of her will. She then proceeds to mention her late husband, as though his spirit might rise up and flinch at your table manners. You try to engage in conversation to deflect, perhaps a mild comment about the weather, or something neutral like wallpaper. But the moment has passed. You are now fork person, forever logged in someone's diary as the reason Mrs. Dinsmore clutched her pearls and declared society unsalvageable. Later in the evening, when the cheese course arrives, you sit motionless. You don't reach. You don't blink. You observe others carefully, memorizing movements, hoping to blend in by mimicry. But the damage is done. You've already buttered the wrong side of society, and now you're living in that slice cold, crumbly, and vaguely humiliating. After dinner, your aunt takes your arm and walks with you slowly through the parlor. She tells you she's not angry, which is always Victorian for furious beyond repair. She says nothing of forks, but does remind you that your second cousin Georgina married into an excellent family, despite her provincial upbringing, which in this context feels less like a compliment and more like a warning. You nod, make the appropriate noises, and vow silently to spend the next week memorizing every known piece of cutlery and its correct application in every possible scenario, including emergencies. Back in your room, you remove your gloves with surgical precision and stare into the fireplace like someone who's just survived battle. Technically, you made it through dinner, but socially, you didn't leave the table. You were removed. You didn't mean to smile. It just slipped out small, harmless, a fleeting upward curve as someone made a joke about pheasants or the price of postage. It wasn't even a full smile, more of a facial shrug. But in this drawing room, under chandeliers that seem to judge from above, it lands with the weight of a minor felony. The man beside you stiffens. A nearby lady pauses mid-sip of her cordial, as if the sound of your happiness has curdled the drink in her mouth. Someone coughs into a handkerchief with a tone that feels more like a rebuke than a respiratory event. You try to smooth your expression back into the neutral blankness everyone else wears like a spiritual corset. But it's too late. The moment has been seen, and worse felt. A footman passes with a tray of tiny cakes. You take one just to have something to do with your hands, even though it tastes like almond and remorse. Across the room, your aunt narrows her eyes. She's wearing half mourning, and the permanent aura of a woman whose nerves have been personally offended by every modern advancement since the invention of plumbing. Her look says, "Control yourself." Her look says, "Feelings are for foreigners and tradespeople." You nod slightly, as if to apologize to the atmosphere. The problem is, it's been a long day. You've been polite for hours. You've agreed with things you don't believe in. You've suppressed the urge to yawn, sneeze, and exist too visibly. You've sat in a chair with the rigidity of a courtroom sketch. So when someone across the room lets out a snort at their own story, your laugh catches you off guard. It bubbles up. Not loud, just a small sound. Air leaving your body with intent. Every head turns. This time, there's no mercy. You have expressed joy, unmoderated and unsolicited, in mixed company. You've disrupted the sacred equilibrium of repression that holds this entire social order together. You've cracked the porcelain surface, and they can smell the human beneath. A man in military uniform glances at you like he's trying to remember whether you're the niece or the ward. A woman clutches her shawl slightly closer, as if laughter is airborne. The hostess, whose voice has the consistency of aspic, announces it's time for music. Someone brings out a pianoforte like it's a defibrillator. You are not invited to perform. Instead, you are invited to sit, quietly, near the edge of the room, where you can be seen but not heard. A place for women who have displayed too much life. The music begins something slow and exact and deeply unhappy. The pianist does not look at the keys. He knows the notes, like the rest of you know how to suppress tears. By rote, you press your lips together. You focus on your teacup. You try to will yourself back into shape. The lady beside you leans in and whispers, "Sometimes I think you forget where you are." You want to tell her you haven't forgotten. You've remembered every second. You've remembered how you're not supposed to laugh, lean into laughter. You've remembered how expressions are fine in theory, but unseemly in practice. You've remembered that sorrow must be elegant and joy must be silent. But most of all, you've remembered that being here means being a shadow of yourself, well-dressed and lightly scented, drifting through conversation like mist over a pond. You nod. Later, in the carriage home, you finally breathe. Your aunt doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The silence is dense and deliberate, the kind that isn't meant to be broken. Outside, the gaslights flicker in time with your heartbeat. You stare out the window and vow, next time, to laugh only on the inside. Far, far inside, where it belongs. You spot him across the room, tall, well-dressed, leaning slightly, as if the world has exhausted him. His waistcoat is embroidered. His cravat looks like it costs more than your aunt's monthly gin allowance, and he's reading a newspaper like it personally offended him. You do not know his name. You are not supposed to know his name. But still, something compels you. Maybe it's the boredom. Maybe it's the wine. Maybe it's the desperation of having just spent 20 minutes discussing seasonal curtain fabrics with a woman who believes emotional restraint is next to godliness. Whatever the reason, you decide foolishly, heroically, that you are going to speak to him. You approach with the cautious optimism of someone trying to pet a strange dog. He glances up, just briefly. You smile. Not too much, just enough to imply humanity. And then, without invitation, you speak. Dreadfully warm in here, isn't it? The silence that follows is not a pause, it is a reckoning. He blinks once, slowly, as if trying to decide whether you've mistaken him for the footman or lost control of your senses entirely. A woman 2 feet away physically flinches. Somewhere behind you, you hear a teacup meet its saucer with the speed of crisis. The pianist misses a note, then recovers, but the damage is done. The music has absorbed your error. It now sounds like tension. You realize too late that you have violated a sacred principle of Victorian society. Talking to someone without the express permission of a third-party witness who can vouch for your bloodline, your sanity, and whether you understand how embroidery rankings work. The man folds his newspaper. Slowly. He does not answer your question. He does not make conversation. He simply bows his head a fraction and says, "I believe we have not been introduced." Not rudely, not angrily, just firmly, like a door closing. You wish the floor would open up and deposit you directly into the root cellar. You attempt to stammer an apology, but there is no safe direction to face. To your left, a woman in mauve is whispering behind her fan, with such speed it could generate wind power. To your right, an elderly gentleman stares at you like you've just proposed nationalizing the railways. The hostess catches your eye from across the room and offers a tight smile that feels like a written warning. You retreat, not dramatically, just enough to signal you understand you've been socially flagged. You hover near the window, pretending to admire the street lamps. You try to fade back into the safety of anonymity, but the room now sees you, and worse, it remembers. It's not just that you spoke, it's that you assumed you had the right to speak. In this world, familiarity must be earned through a complex ritual of referrals and cautious nodding. Without it, your voice is noise. Your presence, presumptuous. Even your observation about the temperature objectively accurate, by the way, is now coded as inappropriate intimacy. You replay the moment, the words, the delivery, the inexplicable optimism. You wonder what came over you. Was it the faint scent of lemon polish? The oppressive lace of your collar slowly severing blood flow to your brain? Or just the deeply human desire to connect, however briefly, with someone who didn't want to tell you about their niece's recent convalescence in Bath? Eventually, your aunt sidles up beside you, all starch and judgment. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't need to. Her voice is soft but glacial. Next time, wait to be introduced. You nod. You will not speak to another soul until a fully credentialed person physically escorts you into a conversation, announces your name like a herald, and stamps your intentions with an official wax seal. Until then, you are invisible. Safely, blessedly, invisible. It happens in half a second, maybe less. You're walking through the square, feet aching slightly from shoes designed more for lineage than locomotion, when you spot her, Lady Weatherby. Her hat is wide, her influence wider. She's flanked by two other women, both carrying parasols, and the kind of expressions that have condemned people to exile with a blink. You see her, she sees you, and you walk past. No nod, no bow, no hat, just breeze, silence, and the light betrayal of a man who has unknowingly committed a full diplomatic offense with his head still covered. At first, you think perhaps it went unnoticed. After all, you were holding a parcel. Your glove was slipping. The sun was in your eyes. There are 1,000 tiny excuses available, and you cling to each like driftwood. But then you hear it. A pause in the conversation behind you. A silence shaped like accusation. You glance over your shoulder, just slightly, and see Lady Weatherby stop walking. You don't see her face. You see the set of her shoulders, the pause in her step, the precise, deliberate way she adjusts her glove, as though reloading. You've declared war. It's not that the hat itself matters. It's what the hat represents. It's centuries of social choreography condensed into a single motion, a lift of the brim, a tilt of the head. These are not gestures. They are acknowledgments of power, of station, of who controls which end of the invisible ladder everyone is clinging to by lace and reputation. When you pass Lady Weatherby without tipping your hat, you do more than forget. You dismiss. You erase her from the social contract. You might as well have insulted her family, her dog, and her flower arrangements in one breath. You think, foolishly, that maybe if you walk faster, it will all dissolve, that the afternoon will carry it away in the breeze, that gossip moves slowly in summer heat, but by the time you turn the corner, it has already begun to spread. A shopkeeper squints at you. A maid offers a curtsy several degrees cooler than yesterday's. Even the cat on the fence seems mildly offended. By the time you arrive at your aunt's townhouse, she's waiting. Not dramatically, just positioned near the window in a way that suggests she's been standing there for 20 minutes, arms crossed, judging the sidewalk. You passed Lady Weatherby, she says. You nod, with your hat still on. You open your mouth, ready to deploy the parcel glove's sunlight defense, but it evaporates under her gaze. She sighs, deeply, the kind of sigh that could power a schooner. Do you know what that means? You do now. It means invitations rescinded. It means rumors. It means arriving at a luncheon next week and discovering your seat has been given to a footstool. It means Lady Weatherby telling people that you've become peculiar, and in this world, peculiar is social quicksand. She tells you you'll need to write a note, a letter of apology, a declaration of hat-based humility, sealed with wax and shame. You'll need to mention the heat, the parcel, and how you were so overcome with admiration you forgot yourself entirely. You will not be sincere. You will be contrite. It is not the same thing. You sit at the writing desk, pen poised, and begin the slow work of groveling with flourish. Outside, a carriage clatters past. Inside, you rehearse every future tip of the hat. Each bow, each nod, every micro-gesture calibrated for survival. Because now you understand. The hat isn't just an accessory, it's a weapon, a flag, a peace treaty you wear on your head. And today, you forgot to raise it, which means tomorrow, someone else will make sure you remember. You were only trying to be polite. That's how it starts. A quiet garden party, the sound of bees pretending not to eavesdrop, and a small plate of cucumber sandwiches you don't really want, but are too polite to refuse. The sun is behaving itself. The string quartet has just begun something tasteful in E minor. You're standing alone, next to a hydrangea bush that looks more socially competent than you feel, when a gentleman appears at your side. Not a gentleman, the one everyone refers to with a slight tilt of the head. as if even his name wears a waistcoat. He has that dangerous kind of charm that seems effortless, like he was born with better posture than you'll ever earn. His voice is warm and dry, like toast left too long under the silver dome. And he says, with devastating neutrality, "Lovely day, isn't it?" And you, tragically, respond, "Yes." The flowers seem particularly committed. That's all. That's the sentence. You don't know why it happens. Maybe it's the nerves. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's because your brain has momentarily fled the building. But it lands. And now it's just the two of you co-conspirators in a conversation you didn't realize was a proposal in disguise. He chuckles. You smile. A silence blooms, thick with implication. Then he asks where you summer, not if where. The assumption that you summer at all is enough to make your ears burn. You mention something vague about the coast. He nods, as if confirming a detail for future generations. Then comes the second blow. He asks if you prefer riding or walking. You don't know which answer is safer. You don't know if one implies a dowry and the other suggests spinsterhood. You say walking. He smiles. So do you. It's already too late. Around you, society has begun taking notes. A chaperone pretends to adjust her bonnet, but does not look away. A lady nearby narrows her eyes like a general surveying terrain. Somewhere behind a trellis, your aunt has frozen mid-sip, waiting for the next syllable to determine whether she will need to summon a lawyer or a clergyman. You talk about books. He likes travelogues. You mention you read one once, out of spite. He laughs again. The sound is soft and somehow contains your future. You compliment his lapel pin because you're floundering. He says it was a gift from his sister. You nod, as if that isn't an entire family introduction in disguise. The string quartet swells. A waiter passes with lemonade and judgment. Then, the unthinkable. He asks if you'll be attending the opera next week. You hesitate, not because you don't want to go, but because you've read this chapter before. In this era, will you be at the opera? Translates roughly to, shall I tell my solicitor you're amenable? And you foolishly say yes. Not I may, not possibly, just yes. He bows, just slightly. You curtsy, barely. And with that, it's done. You have engaged in a full social courtship ritual without realizing the stakes until the game was already over. When you turn to rejoin the others, you're intercepted by 3 different women asking about your taste in lace. One of them touches your sleeve with a sort of reverent despair. A gentleman nods to you as though he now owes you money. A child curtsies for no reason. You have spoken to a man, in daylight, unsupervised. And now, to the watchful eyes of this garden party, you are as good as engaged, possibly already legally binding. Later, in the carriage, your aunt says nothing, just stares straight ahead, clutching her reticule like it contains smelling salts and your entire future. You try to explain. You were just being civil. You were just answering questions. You didn't mean to flirt. You didn't even mean to linger, she says without turning. Next time, talk about the weather. Only the weather. You nod. You will never speak again. You arrive at tea under the misguided impression that it's a casual affair. A little refreshment, some conversation, maybe a scone if you're lucky. What you don't realize, what no one tells you, is that this isn't a social invitation. It's an examination, an ambush in lace, a test of whether you deserve to be seen in public ever again. The drawing room is deceptively delicate, all soft pastels and porcelain, but the energy is surgical. Your hostess is smiling the way a falcon smiles before descending on a vole. Her eyes scan your hands, your posture, the angle at which you cross your ankles. You haven't even touched a biscuit yet, and you're already being weighed like a sack of questionable grain. The tea service is brought in with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for coronations. Silver glints under the gaslight. Tiny tongs appear, A napkin is folded into a shape that might be legally binding. You are handed a cup and immediately make a choice that will haunt you. You add the milk first. It's not loud. There is no gasp. No one drops a plate or faints theatrically into the curtains. But the room shifts. A small flicker passes across your hostess's face, like a bird twitching its wing before deciding not to fly. The maid hesitates just slightly as she offers the sugar bowl. You've done something. You just don't know what. You try to recover by stirring, but your spoon clinks against the porcelain too fast, too loud, too circular. You've stirred like a child, or worse, a foreigner. Proper teaspoon etiquette is slow, deliberate, and never reaches the sides of the cup. You are supposed to agitate your beverage with the solemn grace of a priest blessing water. Instead, you've attacked it like you're scrambling an egg. Your hostess takes her tea without comment, but with a serenity that feels weaponized. Around the table, the conversation resumes with the strained ease of a ship creaking after impact. Someone begins talking about violets. Someone else pretends to be fascinated by regional cheese. You sip. You've added too much sugar. Your mouth confirms it instantly, but there's no way out now. You can't pour it back. You can't start over. You must endure this overly sweet abomination with the composure of someone whose ancestors fought in wars. It's not about flavor anymore. It's about survival. A woman beside you, perhaps sensing weakness, offers you a plate of something unpronounceable and dainty. You thank her and reach, but accidentally use the wrong hand. Not your dominant hand, not the hand closest to the plate. The hand that crosses your body. It's a small thing, a trifle, but in this context, it's akin to standing up and announcing your illegitimacy. Her smile doesn't waver, but her hand retracts the plate ever so slightly faster than necessary. Now you're eating the wrong biscuit with the wrong hand, drinking poorly stirred tea, and sitting slightly too far back in the chair. You know it. They know it. The hydrangeas know it. You try to contribute to the conversation, something safe about weather or wallpaper, but your voice sounds like an interruption. The moment wasn't offered, it was taken. The sentence dies mid-air. No one saves it. When the tea ends, you rise, curtsy, thank the hostess, with the enthusiasm of someone apologizing for a crime they didn't mean to commit. She thanks you for coming with the warmth of a ledger being closed. On the way home, your aunt is silent, not angry, just still, like something in her has frozen. I assume you noticed, she finally says, that Lady Allen did not offer you a second cup. You nod. You did notice. You'll never forget. The first mistake is thinking it's a compliment. The card is small, crisp, embossed with gold leaf and danger. It arrives on a silver tray, delivered by a butler who looks like he's served 3 generations and loathed them all equally. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The silence around the card is already heavy enough to bruise. You pick it up, admire the filigree. The corners are beveled. The ink has depth. You smile because it's pretty, and because no one told you this tiny rectangle of cardstock has the same cultural weight as a courtroom summons and the lifespan of a political scandal. The name on it is unfamiliar, Colonel Edward Harrow. There's no message, no flourish, no explanation, just a name, perfectly centered and terrifying in its confidence. Your first instinct is to flip it over. Check the back for, what? Instructions? A secret code? Something to indicate whether this is a friendly gesture or a threat disguised as stationery? Your aunt clears her throat, the same way a thunderstorm clears a picnic. You touched it, she says, more diagnosis than observation. You look up, card still in hand, and realize with growing horror that she's gone pale. Not out of fear, but formality. A sort of ancestral tension, like generations of etiquette manuals just sat bolt upright inside her spine. Did I not? You ask. She doesn't answer. Instead, she rings the bell. The butler returns with the resigned air of a man hoping to die soon. She tells him, "You will require writing supplies immediately." He vanishes. You are left with the card. "It means he's coming," she says at last. "Tomorrow." You blink. "To visit?" She exhales slowly, like she's trying to forgive you, but your ignorance is physically taxing. "No, dear, he's calling." And just like that, you're in it. The social ritual of calling is not a friendly pop-in. It is not a chance to catch up over biscuits. It is a pre-approved, time-sensitive ballet of obligation, reputation, and fragile power balances. By accepting the card, by touching it, you have entered the arena. You have responded without responding. And now, tomorrow, at precisely 4 o'clock, a man you've never met will arrive and sit in your drawing room while you attempt to exist without causing a scandal. The rest of the day is a blur of lessons. How to greet him, where to sit, which topics are permissible, weather, horse breeds, Belgium, and which are not feelings, politics, your opinion on gooseberries. Your aunt drills you with the urgency of someone trying to defuse a bomb using embroidery floss. By evening, you've developed a migraine and a mortal fear of calling cards. The next day, you're in the drawing room by 3:45. The air smells like polished wood and caution. You've practiced your entrance 12 times. You've memorized his name, his regiment, and his hat size, just in case. At 4, 1 exactly, the butler announces him. Colonel Edward Harrow is taller than expected, with a mustache that looks like it's fought in a duel. He bows precisely. You curtsy with the grace of a chair tipping over. He compliments the drapes. You agree. He says the weather is holding. You nod as if this is a profound observation. There is tea, but no one drinks. There is conversation, but no one relaxes. You feel like a taxidermied version of yourself, propped up in polite terror. 17 minutes later, he rises. The visit is over. No one died, but it's not done. The moment he leaves, your aunt stares at you. You'll need to return the call. You blink. "With another card? With another visit," she says, "unless you wish to appear rude." And just like that, the trap closes. You thought it was paper. It was paperwork. Victorian courtship, social networking, and legal chess, all compressed into a rectangle the size of a biscuit. And now you own a set. You glance at the grandfather clock and make a fatal calculation. It's nearly 10. That feels reasonable. You've smiled at strangers for 4 hours. You've eaten a canapé shaped like a miniature hedgehog. You've danced a waltz with a man who spoke only in yes or no questions and smelled faintly of varnish. Surely, this is enough. Surely, you can leave. You glance at your hostess. She is still glowing, somehow. Not from happiness, but from a sustained performance of grace so intense it could power the entire gaslight system. She's in mid-conversation with a duchess, and they're laughing in that high, glassy way that suggests neither of them remembers what humor is, only that it must be simulated. You don't want to interrupt. You think you'll just slip out quietly. You're halfway to the door when a footman appears. No sound, no warning. Just materializes from the drapery like a judgmental ghost. "Leaving so soon?" he says, and it is not a question. You freeze. Smile. Say something feeble about an early morning. He nods once, disappears. You think it's fine. It's not fine. By the time you reach the cloakroom, 2 more people have noticed your absence. A gentleman near the punch bowl stops mid-sip and narrows his eyes. A young woman drops her fan and doesn't bother picking it up. The pianist falters, just once, and recovers with a jarring chord that sounds like disapproval. Your gloves are returned to you with the kind of stiffness usually reserved for breaking bad news. You manage to thank the attendant and make it to the entryway, heart racing. The door opens, and then it happens. The queen, not Victoria herself, but the social queen of this particular circle, Lady Montcliffe, descends the stairs like she was born on them. She's wearing satin and menace. Her gaze locks onto you with the precision of a hawk who has spotted a squirrel in church shoes. "Why, my dear?" she says, each word dipped in aristocratic venom. "Surely you're not retiring." You try to smile. You mumble something about feeling unwell. She tilts her head. "Indeed? I was under the impression you had just arrived. This is not an error. This is a test. You could lie. Say you must check on a sick aunt, or pretend your carriage is double booked with a countess in labor. But your imagination fails you, and your mouth betrays you with, 'It's just been such a long day.'" There is a silence that settles like dust over polished furniture. Lady Montcliff inhales slowly, theatrically, like she's about to recite a line from a Greek tragedy. "Yes. Well, I do hope the evening hasn't taxed you too terribly." Behind her, a cluster of guests pretends not to listen with the enthusiasm of opera attendees. You are now the central character in a play you didn't audition for. One wrong move, and you're no longer eccentric, you're rude. You nod, apologize, and murmur something vague about the pleasure of her company. She smiles, the kind of smile people give just before closing the gate behind you. You make it outside, at last. The cold air hits your face like absolution. Your driver says nothing, but you can feel it, the tension, the misstep. You have done the unthinkable. You have suggested, through action, if not word, that a Victorian evening could ever be finite, that pleasure might have a limit, that your presence was optional. You didn't leave a party. You questioned the very foundation of the social order. And tomorrow, someone will mention your early departure with the softness of scandal. They'll say your name with a little pause after it. They'll wonder, delicately, if you're quite well these days. Invitations will slow. Conversations will shift. And all because you wanted to go to bed before midnight. You monster. You wake up feeling confident, which is, in hindsight, your first mistake. The dress is simple, tasteful, and most importantly, black. You smooth it down, glance in the mirror, and give yourself a silent nod. Respectful, elegant, funereal. Everything grief is supposed to be, just cinched at the waist. You arrive at the church steps precisely 3 minutes early, which in Victorian time is dangerously late. There's already a crowd gathering, all silent and lacquered in misery. You join them, nodding softly, folding your hands like you've seen it done. No one speaks above a murmur. Even the horses seem to be clomping with restraint. That's when you feel it. A shift. Not in temperature, in attention. Someone is staring. No, not just someone. Everyone. It's not overt, not scandalous. Just eyes, flicking over, glancing down your front, then quickly away. A cough that lasts a second too long. A parasol adjusted unnecessarily. A widow to your left blinks so slowly it feels like a coded warning. You're not sure what you've done yet, only that you've done it very publicly. The service begins. You sit beside your aunt, who does not look at you once. Her posture is the kind developed over decades of dinner parties and disdain. When the hymn starts, her lips move but no sound comes out, possibly to avoid contaminating herself with your presence. It isn't until the procession ends and you're helping yourself to a quiet cup of tea in the reception hall that someone finally says it. "My dear," an older woman whispers, voice softer than embroidery. "You're trim." You glance down. It takes a moment. Then you see it. The ribbon at your collar. It's not black. It's gray. Not deep mourning. Not full bone-deep societal sorrow. Just passing sadness. The kind of color that says, "Yes, I'm sad, but not enough to skip dessert." It's the textile equivalent of a shrug. You might as well be wearing a sash that reads, "Well, we weren't that." And worse. Worse than the color itself is the implication. Victorian mourning is a timeline, a grief schedule. There are stages, rules, fabric densities. You don't just wear black. You wear a specific black at a specific level of sheen, depending on how long it's been since the person died and how much you're supposed to have loved them. Mourning is a performance, and your ribbon just skipped a scene. You have, according to your outfit, either moved on too quickly or never cared at all. It doesn't matter that it was an accident, that you didn't know, that you grabbed this ribbon because it matched your gloves, and you thought tragically that looking respectfully coordinated was the goal. Because now, you're someone who can't follow emotional choreography, someone whose grief is not calibrated, someone untrustworthy. Later, at home, you try to explain. You pull out your other dress, the darker one, the one that matches absolutely nothing and makes your skin look like uncooked pastry. You gesture at your wardrobe, as if proving intent will erase the memory. Your aunt says nothing, just folds a pair of gloves with the severity of an undertaker. They'll remember this, she says finally. People always remember mourning, and they do. For weeks, people greet you with polite pity. Invitations arrive with strange gaps in the date range. A man who once flirted with you now nods like you're a tragic lesson. Someone sends you a bouquet of lilies. No note. You wear black. Properly. From that day forward. Seamless, flawless black. But it doesn't matter. Because everyone has already seen the ribbon, and you can't mourn your way out of it. You laugh. Not loudly, not even unnaturally, but audibly, with teeth, with breath, with the kind of fullness that briefly suggests joy, or worse, comfort. And for that single offense, the entire drawing room turns into a forest of slowly blinking eyes and paused teacups. A chandelier trembles. Somewhere in the back, a woman clutches her pearls, not metaphorically, but with the desperate grip of someone shielding themselves from social collapse. You didn't mean to draw attention. You were just listening to a story about a dog in a bonnet. The punchline wasn't even that funny, but it caught you off guard. Your mouth betrayed you. Your lungs did too. And now, here you are, standing in a room that has mistaken amusement for assault. There's a silence that doesn't belong to the moment. Not the comfortable hush of conversation winding down, but a loaded, bristling stillness, like the room itself is inhaling through its nose. You become aware of every part of your body, hands, knees, eyelids, as though they are now all individually responsible for apologizing. Someone coughs politely. A lady on the chaise lounges just a little harder, like she's collapsing under the weight of your indiscretion. The man who had been speaking some minor, lord, with a spectacularly waxed mustache, stares at you with the expression of someone who has just discovered mayonnaise in a cathedral. He blinks. You're spirited, he says, and it's not a compliment. You try to recover. Lower your voice. Fold yourself into demureness. You attempt a smile that says, "Yes, I am harmless. Please continue your anecdote about hedgerows and small weather." But it's too late. You've revealed yourself. Not just as a person capable of full-bodied emotion, but as someone foreign, possibly American, possibly worse. Your aunt won't meet your eye. When the conversation resumes, it is quieter, measured, smoothed out like tablecloth linen. People are speaking not to you, but around you, the way one speaks near a lit candle gently, and with some concern, it might get out of hand again. You nod and sip your tea, and pretend not to hear the words they don't say out loud. Voluble, untrained, from elsewhere. Later, in the carriage, your aunt finally exhales. You must learn to contain yourself. You try to argue. Surely laughter can't be that serious. Isn't mirth a sign of good breeding? Aren't people supposed to enjoy things? Isn't it better to be warm than brittle? No, she says, as though you've asked whether it's appropriate to wear fishnet stockings to a christening. Laughter is acceptable only in its most muted form. A soft murmur, a ladylike sigh, anything louder, and you sound like you've never had to repress a single thing in your life. You stare out the window. London rolls by, gray and dripping and judgmental. And as the fog curls against the glass, you realize that in this world, volume is class. Stillness is power. Laughter real. Spontaneous laughter is a kind of vulnerability that smells like imported furniture and the wrong kind of currency. You touch joy with your bare hands, and everyone saw it. You make the mistake of feeling confident again. The music starts a lovely little waltz, lilting and tame, and something in your chest dares to bloom. You've made it through dinner without fainting, declined a second scone with just the right level of humility, and only nodded once at a man you hadn't yet been introduced to. A near-perfect evening. And now, here comes the reward. A dance. You spot him across the floor. Lieutenant. Something with the good hair and the jawline that suggests distant Viking ancestry. He bows. You curtsy. It's all happening the way it's meant to. Except for one tiny, almost invisible detail. No one introduced you. No chaperone is present. No dowager aunt has materialized beside you to vouch for your character and gently tether your reputation to the floor like a social anchor. You, in your hubris, have entered a waltz unescorted, and the ballroom feels it. At first, nothing happens. You and the lieutenant circle slowly, your hand on his shoulder, his palm warm against your glove. The room is golden. The air is soft. Everything is perfect. Then the air changes. It's subtle, a drop in pressure, like a storm or a moral reckoning. Someone coughs behind a fan. A violinist falters. The tempo wobbles like a scandal balancing on a teacup. A pair of matrons near the punch table shift, barely, but enough that their skirts whisper like scandal sheets. One leans toward the other and doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. Her silence has punctuation. You spin again. The lieutenant smiles. You try to smile back, but your teeth feel hot. Across the room, your aunt is frozen mid-sip. Her cup hasn't reached her lips. Her eyes have gone wide, not with rage, but calculation. She's assessing the fallout, estimating the damage, running mental equations that determine how many apologies and flower arrangements it will take to salvage this. You complete another turn. This is no longer a dance. It's a duel. Because the waltz, you now understand far too late, is not just a pleasant pastime. It is a coded social ritual. It is proximity with purpose. If you are touching a man on a dance floor without an intermediary, it is assumed you are either engaged or planning to elope by breakfast. This is not movement. This is a message. You complete another turn. You wonder if it's too late to fake an injury. At the far end of the room, a girl whispers something to her mother. Her mother stares at you with the serene intensity of a python sizing up a small, misbehaving rodent. You suddenly understand that every time you've been warned about impropriety, this was the scenario being silently feared. You are not dancing. You are unraveling. When the music ends, there is no applause. Just a polite rustle of fabrics and one single, echoing, You curtsy. The lieutenant bows. You both separate like suspects leaving a crime scene. By the time you reach the edge of the room, your aunt is there. She doesn't scold. She doesn't blink. She simply places a gloved hand on your elbow and guides you, wordlessly, into a side parlor where shame is presumably stored in decanters. What were you thinking? She asks, not out of curiosity, but despair. You don't answer, because the truth is worse than an excuse. You weren't thinking. You were enjoying yourself. And that is the deepest sin of all. Tomorrow, you'll be in the gossip columns. Not by name, just a certain young lady of no remarkable breeding. You'll be discussed in drawing rooms and dismissed in whispers. Someone will say the word unaccompanied like it's a diagnosis. And no one will remember the music. Only that you dared to enjoy it too closely, too freely, too soon. In 3 minutes and 24 seconds, you've turned a waltz into a warning. You see her approach the settee, delicate and composed, with the posture of someone who's had elegance drilled into her spine since birth. Her gloves are cream, her ankles are invisible, her entire existence is calibrated for perception, and, in a moment of what you believe is gallantry, you decide to assist her. You don't think twice. She seems like she could use a hand. The cushions are stiff, the bustle is enormous, and she's clearly trying to calculate how to descend without looking like she's folding in half. You take a step forward, smile gently, and offer your hand. And in that exact second, you commit social manslaughter. She hesitates, but you don't notice. You're already reaching, already caught up in the illusion that good intentions matter here, that your modern sensibility of helpfulness translates into this room like a universal kindness. It does not. She accepts your hand with all the grace of a woman stepping into a battlefield, and the drawing room holds its breath. The moment your fingers touch hers, something shifts in the atmosphere. A teacup somewhere clinks too hard against its saucer. A young man near the fireplace stiffens. An older woman stops mid-conversation and leans forward slightly, as if confirming whether she's witnessing the early stages of an elopement or just a full-blown scandal. You help her lower down. She's light, composed, and says thank you so softly it almost doesn't count. But by now, it's far too late. The choreography of social etiquette has been broken. You skipped steps, skipped an entire scene, really. Because what you just did was not a kind gesture. It was intimate. You didn't just help a woman sit. You touched her uninvited, in public, without the buffer of introduction, family connection, or at the very least a fainting episode to justify it. You, a near stranger, reached out and made physical contact with an unchaperoned woman whose only crime was attempting to sit down politely and keep her reputation intact. And now she is sitting and visibly unraveling. Her cheeks are flushed, not from your touch, but from the calculations she's running in her head. How many people saw? How soon before someone retells this moment at a different house, over a different tea, with added commentary? Because there will be commentary. You didn't just offer help. You wrote a rumor in real time. You can feel it too. That slither of cold spreading across your back like you've opened a door into the wrong room and found an entire dinner party staring at you. A man coughs. A woman adjusts her brooch for the 5th time in 30 seconds. Someone drops a handkerchief and does not retrieve it. Your hostess, a woman of rigid posture and terrifying eyebrows, looks over from her conversation with an earl and lets her eyes rest on you with the weight of inherited judgment. She smiles, but it's the smile of a guillotine. You are not being thanked. You are being marked. You try to act natural, which of course only makes you look guilty. You step back, too quickly. You smile again, too widely. And when someone finally speaks to you, an older gentleman with a monocle that seems to exist purely for emphasis, it is not to ask about your health or your views on the Crimean situation. She seemed quite comfortable with you, he says. There's no question in his voice, only warning. You excuse yourself, but there is nowhere to go. The room is too small. The door is too far. The wallpaper has begun to feel judgmental. You glance back at her. She's now surrounded by 2 other women, both of whom are speaking in tones so soft they might as well be prayers. She nods along, her expression fixed somewhere between composed and mortified. You have done this. With a single outstretched hand, you've upended her social stock like a banker lighting a match in a vault. And the worst part is, she may never recover. Not because of what actually happened, but because of how it looked. Because in this world, optics are the only reality. By next week, she will be the girl who needed help sitting, the one who held a man's hand and exhaled at the same time, the one who's either dangerously forward or tragically clumsy. And you'll be that young man. Not dashing, not kind, just that. You leave the room before someone hands you a pamphlet on deportment. Outside, the air is sharp. London always smells faintly of coal smoke and consequences. You walk quickly, hoping movement will scrape the gilt from your shoes. But it doesn't. You didn't mean to ruin her. You meant to be helpful. But in Victorian society, intent is a footnote. Perception is the whole book. You sit down with the best of intentions. The paper is crisp, the ink is fresh, and the pen feels just the right amount of important in your hand. You're not writing a love letter. You're not even flirting. You're simply replying to a perfectly harmless note from Miss Ashford, who had the audacity to ask how your ankle was after the charity croquet debacle. A thoughtful inquiry, nothing more. You begin politely. You address her with the proper salutation, even underline the dear just slightly to show you're respectful but not emotionally invested. And then, somewhere around paragraph 2, you let your guard down. You use slang. Not a lot. Just a phrase. A casual flourish. A small moment of stylistic flair, meant to show that you're clever, approachable, maybe even a little charming. You write, "I was over the moon to hear from you," and seal the letter with a tiny bit of smugness. A job well done. What you don't realize, what you absolutely should have been taught before being let loose on stationery, is that this turn of phrase is not modern, sweet, or poetic. It is code. It is in the rigidly calibrated linguistic labyrinth of Victorian correspondence, the equivalent of taking a knee and holding out a ring. The phrase, "over the moon," implies emotional elevation, enthusiasm, the sort of unhinged elation that only appears in 3 contexts: poetry, birth announcements, and courtship. And courtship, in this world, is not a casual hobby. It's a legally adjacent pre-engagement limbo, and you've just pole vaulted into it with a single enthusiastic sentence. The letter arrives at her home the next morning. By tea, her mother has read it. By dinner, her father has questions. By the next day, you are the subject of 3 different conversations in households you have never visited. You are a romantic, a fool, a reckless poet. You are, it seems, very much in love, and no one has bothered to ask you about it. Meanwhile, Miss Ashford is trying to remain composed. She does not know whether to expect a formal proposal, a second letter, or a midnight serenade. She clutches the note like it might hatch a future. Her cheeks are flushed, her nerves electrified. She cannot show the letter to anyone else too scandalous, but she also cannot throw it away. Your aunt finds out when a cousin says, "I hear congratulations are in order," and she nearly drops her embroidery scissors. You, for your part, have no idea. You think it went rather well. You're halfway through a follow-up letter before someone finally corners you and informs you gently, almost apologetically, that you may be engaged. You laugh. They do not. You read the letter again and don't see the issue. But of course you don't, because you were raised on novels, not etiquette manuals. And in novels, people say what they feel. They joke, they jest, they overflow. But in real Victorian life, especially in ink, feelings are rationed like sugar. Sentiment must be powdered, folded, and never, ever sound like joy. Joy is suspicious. Joy means you're not thinking rationally. Joy means you are about to abandon your family and abscond to Gretna Green in a borrowed carriage. You scramble to write another letter, this one dry, clinical, brimming with passive voice. You say you are honored by her interest and delighted by her concern, and at no point do you dare to feel anything in the vicinity of the moon. But the damage is done, because in this world, the first letter counts. The first letter means something. People will remember the turn of phrase, not the correction, the implication, not the retraction. You can't walk it back because no one ever officially walked it forward. You simply floated a hint of emotion on scented paper, and everyone else filled in the rest. You tell yourself it's fine, that she knows you didn't mean it that way, that no one will assume anything from a single sentence. But every time you pass her in the park now, she blushes and smiles and looks at you like you've already promised something you haven't figured out how to unpromise yet. It starts innocently, as most catastrophes do. You're mid-conversation at a garden party, holding a teacup that's been cooled by hesitation, and someone mentions the cost of rail tickets to Bath. You nod thoughtfully, the way people do when they have no strong opinion about Bath, but I suspect they're supposed to. There's a pause, the kind that invites small talk. You oblige, you open your mouth, and you say it. Oh yes, I looked at those fares, quite steep, aren't they? Almost 5 shillings just for second class. The world doesn't end immediately, it waits a beat, and then it does. A nearby woman drops her fan. A man who was mid-laugh stops just short of the laugh and leaves it hovering awkwardly in his throat, like a hiccup that's reconsidering its life choices. Somewhere behind you, a fork is set down with the precision of someone trying very hard not to stab something you don't understand yet. You think maybe you were just a bit too loud, or that you pronounced bath incorrectly. Maybe shillings isn't the currency anymore. You glance around for reassurance, but reassurance is already gone, packed its bags, and taken the first carriage out of your social circle. You have committed a cardinal sin. You mention money, not hinted, at it, not implied, not gently alluded to financial matters with the kind of verbal fog Victorian society uses to discuss childbirth or gout. No, you named the number. You quantified your existence. And now everyone in earshot knows exactly how much you think things should cost, which means they know how much you probably have. And now they're all mentally downgrading your lineage. Because here, in this genteel world of lace cuffs and social tightrope walking, wealth is not a subject. It is a scent. It should be sensed, not shown. Confirmed through horses and hem lengths, not through direct statements about ticket prices. If you were truly of means, you wouldn't know the fare to Bath. Your valet would know, or your secretary, or the stars would simply align and a chaise would appear when you wished it. By speaking of money, you've declared something vulgar. Worse, you've shown that you think about it, which means you need it, which means you are now, essentially, a tradesman in disguise. The hostess gives you a smile so thin it could be used to slice pears. She turns to the person beside her and begins a new conversation, loudly, about dahlias. You've been audibly redirected. Congratulations. The man to your left coughs gently and mentions fox hunting. You nod, dazed, unsure if this is a lifeline or a social execution by anecdote. You mumble something about stirrups and wish the ground would open and charge you rent. Even the peacocks seem to avoid your eye. Later, you'll replay it and think, but everyone spends money. Why can't we talk about it? You'll reason that transparency is admirable, that honesty is refreshing. But here, those ideas are charmingly naive. Victorian society doesn't reward realism. It rewards performance. Everyone is pretending they don't budget. Everyone is pretending they were born draped in inherited silk, cushioned by ancestral portraits and land that somehow breeds coinage on its own. By acknowledging cost, you've reminded them all of the lie. And no one likes that, so you stand there, nodding at dahlias, listening to foxes, wondering if you can recover. You probably can't, because here, social standing isn't lost all at once. It unravels quietly, steadily, with each moment like this, each accidental truth you reveal, each glimpse you offer into the mechanics behind the curtain. You finish your tea, lukewarm and lonely, and you make a note. Next time, Bath is lovely this time of year, and its price is unspeakable. It begins with the roast pheasant and ends with national collapse. You don't mean to say anything controversial. You've survived 3 courses already, nodded politely through 2 different monologues about seasonal wallpaper patterns, and even laughed convincingly at a pun involving trout. You're doing well. You've held your fork correctly. You haven't gestured with your knife. You've been a paragon of restraint, a poster child for silent suffering in the name of social harmony. And then, the host mentions Parliament, lightly, almost abstractly, a passing comment about a bill or a pier or a railway expansion, something that barely counts as conversation, really. It's tossed out like a breadcrumb. And you, hungry for actual discussion, bite. You make the mistake of responding, not even forcefully. You don't stand on your chair or slap the table. You just offer a measured, reasonable opinion about taxes, or land rights, or voting, something that in any other century would count as thoughtful engagement, and in this one counts as times treason asterisk. The table doesn't go silent. It goes times still asterisk, the kind of still usually reserved for thunderstorms or fainting goats. A spoon halts mid-air. A wine glass lingers near a mouth but doesn't make contact. Someone at the far end of the table inhales too sharply and starts coughing, which briefly masks the silence before making it somehow worse. You don't understand the reaction. Not yet. You think maybe they just misheard you. You smile, ready to clarify. But it's already too late, because politics, in this room, is not a subject. It's a leak in the ceiling, something you pretend isn't happening until the house collapses. It is never addressed directly, never discussed over food, especially not during the soup course, especially not when the Dowager Lady Ellingsworth is seated within earshot and has been known to burst into tears at the mention of trade tariffs. Someone tries to redirect, a nervous laugh, a clink of silverware, a frantic question about rhododendrons. You try to follow, to make a swift exit from the conversational crime scene, but it's no good. The damage is done. The statement lingers in the air like cigar smoke. And then, from the doorway, a soft thud. The cook has fainted. She was delivering the next dish, something poached, something jellied, and caught the tail end of your sentence. A sentence which, unfortunately, included the phrase ministerial incompetence. She hit the floor like a Victorian chandelier. 2 footmen rush to her aid. A third removes the tray, with the speed of someone trained in crisis management. The hostess rises just enough to look horrified, then sits again, as if unsure whether to address the event or pretend it never happened. You are, unquestionably, the cause. Aunt Lillian, seated beside you, whispers, "Perhaps we save current affairs for the drawing room, dear," in the tone of someone instructing you to quietly put out a fire you started in a nursery. You nod, cheeks burning, and take a sip of water, which only makes the moment last longer. The host clears his throat, introduces the next course, and dinner limps forward like a carriage with a broken axle. Conversation never quite recovers. You, of course, didn't know. No one told you that politics are like undergarments, absolutely present, wildly important, and never discussed in polite company. You assumed, foolishly, that intelligent people could talk about the world, that you could ask questions, offer perspectives, suggest that perhaps the Prime Minister isn't a demigod carved from mahogany, but here, ideas are only safe if they come with embroidery. Later, as you stand awkwardly by a fern in the drawing room, someone will pat your arm and say, "Spirited opinion," that, in the way one might comment on a suspicious mole. You will nod and vow never to speak again, not in public, not near soup. The cook, revived by brandy and confusion, will not make eye contact with you when you pass her in the hallway. You have become a household incident, a conversational cautionary tale, and the next time someone mentions Parliament, you will smile, nod, and say, "Ah, yes, the rhododendrons have been dreadful this year." It's Sunday morning, and instead of sitting in a pew shaped like a back brace from the Middle Ages, you are still in bed. Not sinning, not scheming, not sacrificing anything in a forest. Just horizontal, warm, trying to summon the energy to pretend to care about Reverend Stapleton's third sermon this week on the moral dangers of unattended ankles. You think, reasonably, that one Sunday won't matter. Everyone skips now and then. Sometimes people get colds. Sometimes their carriages mysteriously break. Sometimes they mysteriously forget to arrange a carriage at all. And since no one will see you not at church, maybe this time you'll get away with it. You forget, of course, that in Victorian society, visibility is morality, and this morning you are invisible. By the time you finish your tea and reach for a book you've actually been wanting to read for weeks, the first report has already been filed. Mrs. Weatherby, who keeps binoculars on her window ledge and believes God appreciates initiative, has scanned the street and noticed your absence. She says nothing at first, just presses her lips together in a way that suggests either divine disappointment or mild indigestion. At precisely 11:13 a.m., she informs her maid. By 11:45, her maid tells the butcher's boy. By noon, your social obituary is being whispered over Yorkshire pudding in half the dining rooms within a 3-mile radius. You're not just absent, you're unaccounted for. And by Victorian logic, that means one thing: heresy. After all, who skips church unless they have something to hide? Not illness. Illness attends in a blanket. Illness asks for prayers. Illness sends someone ahead to say you're home, but very, very repentant about it. You, on the other hand, have not sent word. You have not asked forgiveness. You have not even feigned consumption. You've simply stayed home, like some sort of Frenchman. Now, everyone is wondering what you are doing. Theories emerge. Maybe you're a lapsed Protestant. Maybe you've taken up spiritualism. Maybe you've started dancing alone in your drawing room and reading poetry that doesn't rhyme. Worse, maybe you've begun thinking independently, which, in some circles, is practically devil worship. By Monday, you can feel the difference. The grocer takes a beat too long to weigh your flour. The vicar's wife nods at you, but her eyes are filled with the same expression she uses when discussing rodents. Even your neighbor's dog avoids your gate. The cook mutters something about protective herbs and hangs rosemary in the pantry. Your housemaid asks too casually whether you'd like her to water the garden, or perhaps sprinkle holy water on the doorstep just in case. It's not just gossip. It's a quiet, velvet-lined panic. Because in this world, religion isn't just belief. It's infrastructure. It's proof of compliance. Going to church shows that you accept the rules, that you're safe, that you'll nod when asked, sit when told, and confess nothing except how sorry you are for existing too loudly. Missing one Sunday is not a scheduling error. It's an announcement, and yours said, "I do not fear you," which, ironically, is the one thing that makes them fear you. You could explain, of course. You could claim exhaustion. Say you fell asleep reading the Psalms and didn't wake up until the bell stopped ringing. But explanations don't matter anymore. Once suspicion begins, logic becomes decorative. The narrative has taken root. You've been marked not as evil, but as unpredictable. And in Victorian society, unpredictable people are just witches without the courtesy of a broom. Next Sunday, you'll arrive early, hat perfectly tilted, gloves pristine, hymnal already bookmarked. And still, Mrs. Weatherby will glance over her shoulder to check if your shadow is pointing the right direction, just in case. It's supposed to be a kind gesture, a moment of warmth, a small human connection in a world that feels like it was engineered by porcelain dolls with authority issues. You're not trying to scandalize anyone. You're simply trying to greet your great aunt the way you'd greet any beloved elder, with open arms and a half smile that says, "I was raised well enough to remember your birthday, but not well enough to suppress affection entirely." You step forward. She does not. You initiate the hug. She initiates a full-body recoil. You've barely made contact before she goes rigid, the way one does when a pigeon flies too close or when one suspects the soup might be French. Her spine, previously stooped from age, realigns with military precision. Her arms remain glued to her sides, her expression caught somewhere between personal offense and spiritual trauma. You step back quickly, realizing far too late that you've made a mistake. You have touched a Victorian, in daylight. Without warning, you may as well have proposed marriage in the street. The room takes notice. You feel it before you see it. A collective tightening of posture, a sudden preoccupation with teaspoons and wallpaper patterns. Someone coughs, once, pointedly. A footman shifts his gaze to the floor with the grim sympathy of a man witnessing a carriage accident in slow motion. Your aunt smooths her bodice, not because it's wrinkled, but because her soul has just been disheveled. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her silence is a sermon, one that echoes across generations. Because here, touch is not a casual currency. It is a declaration, and you just yelled in the language of arms what should have been whispered with eye contact and several years of mutual silence. Physical contact, in this world, follows a script so precise it makes legal contracts look spontaneous. There are categories, there are subclauses. A gloved handshake is acceptable under specific conditions. Daylight hours, public setting, someone else has already touched first. A pat on the shoulder is high-risk behavior, reserved for death notifications and near drownings. A hug is, basically, a full-scale emotional assault. You meant affection. They heard intimacy. They saw rebellion. Later, someone will mention your hug as though it were a phase. "Oh, they're very modern," they'll say, the way one might describe someone who eats radishes unpeeled or owns books in American spelling. Someone else will nod sagely and reply, "Well, their mother was quite tactile," as though touchability is hereditary, like freckles or a gambling problem. You'll want to defend yourself, to explain that where you're from, hugging relatives is seen as polite, even loving. That warmth is not a threat. That physical closeness isn't always code for scandal. But none of that matters now, because the damage isn't in what you did. It's in what you didn't do. You didn't maintain the delicate illusion of emotional restraint. You didn't respect the sacred inch of airspace between two people who happen to share blood, but never, under any circumstances, share body, heat. And now your aunt will write about this in her diary, and that diary will survive her. And generations from now, a descendant will read of the day you folded your arms around Lady Hester Elmsworth, uninvited, and historians will simply note, hysteria ensued. Next time, you will nod, once, from 3 feet away, and that will be love enough. You forget to take off your hat. That's it. That's the whole crime. A soft, forgettable, entirely mundane oversight in any other time period. But here, in the lace-curtained, etiquette-infested thicket of Victorian society, it's the equivalent of lighting a pipe in a nursery or kicking over the Queen's favorite potted fern. You step through the doorway into a parlor that smells like roses and quiet resentment, and the hat stays on, still perched on your head like a personal manifesto, felt, tilted, offensive. You don't notice right away, because you're focused on not tripping over a rug that has the texture of cold toast and costs more than your annual income. You're just trying to smile and nod, to appear calm while navigating yet another house that treats social grace like competitive fencing. Then the silence hits you, not the usual pause reserved for awkward entrances or uncertain introductions, but the deeper, frostier kind, the one that comes when everyone sees something they are not supposed to see and doesn't yet know whether to scream or faint. You stand there, the hat stands with you, and the room recoils. Lady Bramsfield's monocle slides ever so slightly down her nose. Sir Alan reaches for his tea, misses, and gently knocks over a spoon instead. One woman in the corner clutches her husband's arm like she's just witnessed the first act of a revolution. Someone whispers, not helpfully, Oh, they've left it on. You reach up too late and your fingers brush the brim in horror. And now it's worse. Because now they know you didn't mean to. You didn't keep it on as a statement, or in mourning, or for a religious exemption. You simply forgot. Which means you lack the awareness, the instinctual shame, the training expected of anyone allowed near a cucumber sandwich. Your host approaches with the delicate floating gait of someone trained in diplomacy and sabotage. She smiles like a person offering a condemned prisoner a final glass of sherry. "Darling," she says softly, "perhaps you'd be more comfortable without your hat?" You remove it immediately. The gesture is apologetic, desperate, too late to salvage dignity, and like a dog that's just knocked over a priceless vase, you try to shrink your presence, to flatten into the wallpaper, to not exist so loudly in the memory of this house. But the damage is done, because hats are not just fabric. They are declarations. Outdoors, a hat is authority. It shields you from the sun, the wind, the stares of the lower classes. Indoors, it becomes arrogance, a refusal to yield, a suggestion that the rules do not apply to you. Keeping it on is interpreted as a warning shot, the social equivalent of bringing a loaded musket to a dinner party and placing it gently on the table between the aspic and the blancmange. You didn't mean rebellion, but that's not what they saw. They saw a challenger, a radical, a person unanchored by custom, and therefore, in Victorian logic, capable of anything. You take your seat. They take mental notes. Conversations resume, but you're now the asterisk in every sentence. "He seems perfectly lovely," someone will say later, except for the incident. And incident is all it takes. A single syllable that turns an afternoon visit into a cautionary tale for children and parlor maids alike. Your hat rests beside you on the chair like an accomplice, silent and smug. And as you sip your tea with trembling fingers, you realize the terrifying truth. Nothing is just clothing here. Not gloves, not lace, not the tragic corset that's been, slowly rearranging your organs. Every item is a coded message, every accessory a contract. And today, your hat screamed, revolution. You meant to write it. Truly, you did. You even picked out the stationery thick, embossed, something that said, "I am both grateful and wealthy." You considered ink color. Blue felt honest. Black felt eternal. Gold felt like a lie, but a beautiful one. You had the quill in hand. You had the intention. But then days passed, and intention aged into negligence. And now, Mrs. Featherstone's alliance with your family is in flames. It was a harmless weekend in the countryside, filled with the usual things: trembling sandwiches, emotionally repressed walks, and formal meals that felt like sentencing hearings. You were hosted, fed, allowed to exist near heirloom furniture. A swan may have nodded at you on the lake, which counts as intimacy here, Mrs. Featherstone even let you hold her prized Cavalier King Charles Spaniel for 4 entire seconds, an act tantamount to sharing a bank account. You smiled, you curtsied, you left, you never wrote. At first, there is only silence, which you mistake for peace, a gentle stillness, like snow. Then, it turns colder, an absence with edges. Your mother stops receiving invitations. Your brother's name is no longer spoken with hope at parties. Your cousin Henry, who once shared a fencing tutor with the Featherstone heir, finds his lessons mysteriously canceled due to a sudden plague of improper breeding. You hear whispers, not even proper gossip, just damp little hints. So odd, no note. Quite an omission, really. She's written thank you letters to footmen before. Imagine not sending one to her. And suddenly, you understand. Gratitude in this society isn't a feeling. It's a binding contract, a ritual offering, a form of legal tender pressed onto paper, sealed with wax, and hand-delivered with just enough time delay to suggest you were moved, but not too moved. Thank you notes aren't optional. They're lifelines. Without yours, Mrs. Featherstone has had to assume the worst. That her house was insufficient, that her dog drooled, that the lemonade at luncheon wasn't lemony enough, and you stormed away in quiet disdain, clutching a mental list of faults you planned to air in some malicious diary, or worse, to the press. You consider writing it now, a charming apology, something that might repair the damage, but you're too late, because a thank you note must arrive within 3 days, or it becomes a confession. Any longer, and you're not thanking someone, you're admitting guilt. Now you must navigate the delicate theater of damage control. You attempt to send flowers. They are returned. Not dramatically, but with a note written in a hand so delicate it might as well have been composed by frost. How very thoughtful. We did not expect a botanical response. You try to mention it at tea gently. Lady Swinstead smiles at you with the bland benevolence of someone watching a squirrel try to undo a padlock. It's very hard to keep up, you murmur. Oh no, she replies. Some of us still manage. Your mother sighs at you across a game of whist. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. Her disappointment drips off her like condensation off a forgotten sherry glass. Because this isn't just about one woman. It's about networks. Mrs. Featherstone was a node. She connected your family to 7 others. Her drawing room was a hub of fortune, engagement, and seasonal relevance. And now you've been unplugged, cold-shouldered, banished to the quiet limbo, where the socially exiled go to mispronounce things and wear the wrong gloves, all because of a single sheet of paper. You could have scribbled anything, really. Lovely time, deeply moved. Your hedgerow is a national treasure. It didn't have to be poetry. It didn't even have to be honest. It just had to exist. But you didn't send it. You chose, perhaps by accident, silence. And in this world, silence is violence, wrapped in monogrammed stationery. So now you sit at your writing desk, pen hovering over a blank page, knowing it won't matter anymore. The bridge has burned. The ink might as well be ashes. You were handed a social script. You missed your cue, and now you are the story. You walk fast, not Olympic sprinter fast, but enough to give the impression that you're either being pursued or about to deliver news that will destabilize a continent. It starts innocently. The park is lovely, with its winding gravel paths and anxious swans. Your shoes click with purpose. You are breathing, moving, existing with mild intent. But that's all it takes. Intent. Because in the Victorian park, one does not simply walk, one promenades, which is less about movement and more about performance. A slow, decorative drift meant to imply that you have nothing urgent to do, nowhere pressing to be, and certainly no thoughts rattling around in your head that require velocity. Leisure, here, is a virtue. Haste is criminal. You miss the first sign of trouble, a slight stiffening in the posture of a nearby duchess, as you pass her with what can only be described as modern enthusiasm. Her parasol twitches. Her eyebrows ascend with the aerodynamic grace of a hot air balloon. Still, you press on. You overtake a pair of elderly gentlemen engaged in a conversation so slow it could be measured in glacial time. One of them clutches his walking stick like it might be needed to fend off whatever storm you're clearly outrunning. You nod politely. He narrows his eyes as though trying to determine which revolution you're late for. You think you're being efficient. They think you're declaring war. By the time you loop back past the fountain, where pigeons plot coups and children are quietly terrorized by nannies, named things like prudence and scorn, there's a new atmosphere. Eyes follow you, not with admiration or curiosity, but with the same unease reserved for wild dogs or unpredictable weather. A man leans over to his companion and murmurs something, nodding in your direction. She gasps audibly and adjusts her gloves like she's bracing for impact. You slow your pace a little, try to soften your footsteps. but the damage is done. Because once someone in Victorian society appears in a hurry, everyone else must assume something terrible is about to happen. A scandal, a duel, an unchaperoned woman left unattended near a hedge. And now, you've created momentum. Not physical, but social. Whispers start to circulate, like strong tea. Who are they? Why are they in such a rush? Has there been an elopement? A fire? A dishonor too grave to name? Entire reputations begin to unravel in your wake, stitched together by nothing more than your brisk stride and total ignorance of perambulation etiquette. A constable appears, not in a threatening way, but with the confused caution of someone who's been told to intercept a menace, but sees only a person walking energetically past begonias. He tips his hat. You nod. This exchange alone is enough to fuel 5 separate rumors before sundown. You try to explain to someone, an old friend of your aunt's, whose mustache looks like it's seen military action, that you just had a lot of tea, and now you're simply full of motion. He stares at you, like you've confessed to public nudity. Because here, energy is suspect, movement is filtered, and urgency implies you've either committed something or are about to confess to it. The park clears slightly as people tactfully drift elsewhere, creating space as if your enthusiasm might be contagious. Birds take off. A squirrel drops an acorn, like it no longer trusts the system. You finally stop. Not because you're tired, but because you can feel the psychic weight of 100 judgments crawling up the back of your neck like a poorly tied cravat. You attempt to linger near a bench, perhaps sketch a flower, do anything that suggests aimlessness. But it's too late. Somewhere, in a drawing room laced with quiet doom, someone is already saying, "They stormed through Hyde Park like a Bolshevik on deadline." By dusk, you will have been promoted from curious oddity to scandal in motion. By Sunday, a minor poem will circulate under the title "The Galloping Stranger," and your hat will be blamed. Because in the end, it's not about the walking. It's about what your walking meant. And today, it meant revolution. You're just trying to be polite. That's the worst part. You open your mouth, you smile gently, and you say, "Thank you," to the footman, out loud, in front of everyone. There is a silence. Not the graceful, candlelit kind of silence that suggests reverence or refined digestion. No, this is the heavy kind. The kind that settles over a room like smoke after a cannon misfires. Somewhere in the drawing room, a teacup halts midair. A monocle quietly gives, up and abandons its post. You have done the unthinkable. You have spoken to someone below your station, directly, with warmth, like a French person. The footman, for his part, looks stricken. His eyes widen just slightly, the way a soldier might upon stepping on a landmine labeled impropriety. He bows quickly and evaporates in the direction of the hallway, as though physical distance might erase the social damage now staining the room. You look around, hoping someone will smile back, perhaps even offer a subtle nod of approval for your charming display of egalitarian kindness. Instead, Lady Densbury is blinking at you like you've just suggested replacing the monarchy with a rotating cast of butlers. Lord Halberton's mustache seems to recoil. Even the pianoforte coughs. You don't get it at first. After all, where you come from, treating someone with basic decency is less a political statement and more Tuesday. But here, in this powdered, perfumed diorama of a world, your "thank you" might as well have been a manifesto. You try to recover. You reach for your teacup, hoping the motion will signal a return to normalcy. But your hand trembles slightly. And of course, this only reinforces the assumption that you are tragically foreign. Because let's be clear, to acknowledge a servant with direct eye contact and informal gratitude is, by Victorian standards, deeply continental. And not in the charming, has good wine and ideas about liberty kind of way. More in the likely to initiate a revolution mid-brunch way. Your hostess leans in slightly, the pearls at her throat doing their best to maintain composure. "They're quite new to London," she whispers to no one in particular, in the tone of someone explaining why her parlor has just caught fire. Across the room, someone whispers the word French, the way one might whisper arsenic. The irony is that the servant, whose humanity you dared to acknowledge, will now have to spend the rest of the evening pretending you don't exist, lest he too be accused of harboring dangerous notions about equality. He's already been demoted in spirit, possibly reassigned to a less visible corner of the estate where manners are less likely to combust. And it's not just that you spoke, it's that you spoke without intermediary, without going through your host, without filtering your gratitude through the appropriate channels of social ventilation. The class structure here is a multi-tiered wedding cake, and you just shoved your hand through the fondant and offered the bottom layer a high five. To them, this isn't about kindness, it's about boundaries, about knowing your place and everyone else's, and never letting the invisible threads of hierarchy get tangled. The servant is meant to be there, of course. He's supposed to float around like a decorative ghost, silently managing the needs of those whose names are embroidered into linens. But he's not meant to exist, in the conversational sense. Not unless someone dies. And even then, only to identify the body or fetch smelling salts. You consider saying something else. Maybe an apology. Maybe a clarification that no, you're not French, and you mean no harm. But you know now that every word will only bury you deeper in the velvet-lined pit of class confusion. So, you sit, you sip, you smile vaguely, and later, someone will mention your little outburst with the same hushed caution used for scandals involving Italian opera singers or improper mustache trimming. You'll be referred to as spirited, or, if they're feeling generous, continental. Meanwhile, the footman will likely be reassigned to polishing doorknobs in a wing of the house where social contagion can't spread. And from now on, you will nod, silent, distant, like a proper English statue that just happens to breathe. You see a chair. It has legs, a back, even a polite little wobble that suggests it was made before the discovery of balance. But it's missing one crucial thing, the cushion. And not just any cushion. The cushion, the sanctioned, embroidered, ceremonially fluffed rectangle of fabric that separates you, a human being of questionable lineage, from the direct judgment of hard furniture. You don't notice its absence at first. You're too focused on executing the descent, the careful hover, the ankle alignment, the gentle folding of knees at a socially pre-approved angle. You even remember to touch the folds of your skirt like they're filled with national secrets. But then your body makes contact with wood, bare wood. You hear the dull thud of failure echo into the ancestral memory of every matron in the room. It's done. You have sat without a cushion, and now your soul is in question. Lady Marigold, who has been pretending not to look at you since you entered the room, has turned fully in your direction, her eyes wide and glassy, like a porcelain doll just witnessed a murder. Her mouth parts ever so slightly, as if your direct collision with furniture has expelled all remaining faith she had in the younger generation. The Reverend's wife clutches her fan like it contains the last confession of the evening. She is already praying for you. Not aloud, of course. This isn't a revival tent. But her lips twitch in a way that suggests mental absolution is being requested on your behalf. You feel the judgment seep into your spine. Literally, because this chair, without its sacred padding, is not ergonomically inclined to kindness. Your bones are conversing directly with mahogany now, and the mahogany is saying, "You deserve this." No one offers you help. No one rushes in with a rescue pillow. This is a test, or a punishment, or both, because in Victorian society, comfort wasn't just overlooked, it was feared. And choosing to rest your posterior on unmediated oak sends a message, a dark, confusing, possibly French message. You are either dangerously humble, suspiciously radical, or emotionally crumbling. There is no innocent explanation. Across the room, a maid enters carrying a tray of tea cakes. She sees you, sees the absence, sees your entire life collapse into one poorly upholstered moment. Her eyebrows twitch just slightly, a silent offering of solidarity between two people who know exactly how sharp antique furniture can be, and then she moves on. Her job is to serve the cake, not the social correction. You try not to shift, but every inch of your posture is betraying you. Because there is no way to sit on naked furniture without looking like you've made several life mistakes. Your back begins to curve. Your shoulder twitches. Your legs are beginning to lose circulation. You look like someone slowly being possessed by regret and splinters. And still, no one helps. Because this isn't about furniture. It never was. The cushion is status. A soft, floral-stitched reminder that someone, somewhere, believes you deserve insulation. That you are not raw, desperate, or worst of all American. To deny the cushion is to deny your place. To sit on wood is to scream, I am not one of you. Even if your dress says otherwise. Even if your calling card had the appropriate border. Eventually, you shift slightly to one side, trying to simulate the feeling of padding through sheer optimism. It doesn't work. You now look like you're trying to pass gas in Morse code. A gentleman clears his throat across the room. Someone else sips tea with the force of ancient disapproval. You have disrupted the aesthetic. You have sullied the choreography. You are a blemish in an otherwise symmetrical tableau of propriety and poor digestion. The event continues. People chat. Plates clink. Someone recites a poem about autumnal decay. But your chair remains hard, your spirit brittle, and your reputation slowly calcifying into something that will be referenced at parties for years. You came to sit. You stayed to suffer. And in doing so, you have proven nothing, except that you are spiritually unstable, and that perhaps you were never truly British to begin with. You think it's harmless. A smile, a flash of politeness worn like a soft accessory, not even your best one. To be honest, just a casual upward twitch of the lips because a gentleman opened the door for you and didn't immediately die of gout. It's instinctual, a reflex. You're barely conscious of it. But the moment your face betrays even a flicker of warmth, the entire atmosphere hardens like someone's just dropped a piano into a baptism. You've smiled, in public, at a man, and now you're basically married, not theoretically. Not in the joking, oh my gosh, we're so cute modern way. No, you've just initiated an emotional contract with legal implications, social expectations, and the possible transfer of livestock. Because in Victorian society, the mouth was not a place for feelings. It was a place for dental anxiety, modest sips of weak tea, and saying indeed with haunting neutrality. But yours? Yours moved, and he saw it. Worse, he smiled back. And now the surrounding public, a collection of women in hats, elderly men with walking sticks, and one silent gardener who is now deeply invested, has begun observing the ritual. You've triggered a courtship alert, and your actions are being tallied like votes in a scandal. You can feel it behind you, the shift in air, the auditory hush. It's not silence exactly, more like suspense taking human form. The man whose name you don't know, who may or may not be the second cousin of someone with a seat in Parliament, nods slightly in your direction. You nod back, trying to scale it down, but it's too late. The damage is done. 3 older women whisper behind their gloves. One nods solemnly. That's Mrs. Thistlethwaite. She's already composing your wedding announcement in her head. Somewhere, an invitation to. Next week's dinner party is being edited to include both your names. You try to walk away, but walking now implies something. You're either coy or overwhelmed with romantic emotion. You pause instead. But pausing implies anticipation. You are now a statue of longing. He approaches. This man again, A complete stranger who may very well collect moths for sport stops a polite distance away and inclines his head like he's about to duel someone for your honor. "Miss," he says. You respond with something barely audible. It's not even a word, just a social wheeze. He seems satisfied. And now, congratulations are practically in order, because this is how it begins. Not with roses, not with whispered poetry, but with a smile that failed to be appropriately neutral and has now rewritten the trajectory of two unrelated bloodlines. You make it to the end of the path and into the relative safety of a bench, your cheeks burning, your soul blinking in confusion. You don't even remember what you were thinking before this moment. You might have been on your way to post a letter. You might have been admiring the trees. But now you're thinking about bridesmaids and whether you'll have to learn to waltz. The gardener coughs meaningfully behind you. It's the sound of witness testimony. Someone hands you a folded fan, not because you're hot, but because you're now the object of Victorian speculation, and fanning was the period's equivalent of Googling how to emotionally cope with sudden marriage. You could deny it, laugh it off, say it was just a mistake, but in doing so, you'd be calling the man's honor into question. You'd be suggesting that your face moves without discretion, which is only slightly less scandalous than arson. And worst of all, you'd be rejecting a man publicly, which is not only bad manners but spiritual arson. Souls have been condemned for less. So you do what any well-raised member of the gentry does in a moment of quiet emotional panic. You sit perfectly still. You contemplate your future, and you wonder how you'll break it to your family that you've accidentally smiled your way into a 6-month engagement, 4 chaperoned strolls, and a possible estate near Surrey. It was just a smile. But now you're picking out curtains. You say it without thinking. Just a harmless sigh, a hand briefly raised to your temple, and a soft mutter of honesty. I'm rather tired. You may as well have dropped your corset in the punch bowl. 3 women glance up in unison, their teacups frozen mid-air like porcelain satellites. One of them inhales sharply, another clutches a shawl, and the third just stares at you with the expression of someone watching society crumble in real time. You have, with a single sentence, taken a gentle step outside the iron cage of decorum. And in Victorian England, that's not called being human, that's called exhibiting symptoms. You are now, officially, a case study. The room doesn't exactly spin, but it tilts slightly as though reality itself is preparing to faint onto a nearby chaise longue. Someone clears their throat. The maid retreats with eyes downcast, and beside you, your great-aunt very slowly lowers her embroidery into her lap, like she's about to speak to a ghost. "My dear," she says, in the tone of someone addressing a wayward lamb, "do you mean tired or emotionally fatigued? It's a trap. You know it's a trap. But your brain, foggy from the treacle tart and the 27 layers of social tension, makes the fatal decision to tell the truth. Both, perhaps. And just like that, your great-aunt has ceased to exist. In her place now sits a concerned matron of the empire, preparing to summon an apothecary, a clergyman, and possibly a team of moral reinforcements. You are no longer a young woman of decent standing. You are now a delicate constitution, a tendency toward melancholy, a cautionary tale in the making. Someone offers you smelling salts. You haven't fainted. You're sitting perfectly upright, barely even blinking. But the mere suggestion of fatigue, especially unaccompanied by a detailed explanation involving embroidery strain or low-quality mutton, is enough to sound the alarm. Your uncle is already mumbling something about the nerves. A cousin eyes you warily, like you might start speaking French or levitating. You attempt a smile, a casual little grin, as if to say, "Look, it's nothing. I'm just a bit tired from doing absolutely nothing all day, while wearing a dress that weighs more than a horse." But the smile is misread, as all smiles are when emitted by someone suspected of mental disturbance. They assume it's the beginning of an episode, There is talk of a rest cure. You didn't know what that was before today. Now you learn that it involves lying motionless in a darkened room for 6 weeks while being spoon-fed beef broth and stared at by a nurse named Maud. It is meant to restore your feminine vitality, or at least make you quiet enough to stop alarming the help. Someone hands you a pamphlet. It is titled The Strain of the Female Mind, a Moral Guide. You begin reading it upside down because, frankly, your motor skills are failing under pressure. You are beginning to wish you had fainted because at least then you'd be horizontal. A doctor has been summoned. You ask who invited him. I did, says your aunt, gently. You mention tiredness. You consider running. You consider throwing yourself behind the heavy velvet curtains and pretending to be a forgotten statue. But running implies hysteria, and hiding confirms it. You are trapped in the most diabolical diagnostic system imaginable, one where every natural emotion is evidence of disease, and every attempt to deny the diagnosis simply proves it further. You try again. I meant, you say, carefully, that I didn't sleep well. Oh, no, says your cousin, alarmed. Insomnia. The doctor arrives. He checks your pupils and your pulse, but mostly, he studies your ability to sit still while silently screaming. He recommends tonics. He mentions the asylum only once, and only in the same casual tone someone might use to suggest the theater. And all the while, you sit there, nodding, demurring, performing the precise choreography of a woman not succumbing to panic while being treated like a ticking psychological device. You don't say another word for the rest of the afternoon, which is interpreted, of course, as progress. You only wanted to know where the library was. A simple, civilized query, spoken in your softest, most vowel-flattened tone. But the moment the words exit your mouth, "Excuse me, could you direct me to the library?" the air shifts. Heads turn. A teacup rattles. Somewhere in the distance, a monocle hits the ground in slow motion. A man holding a cane looks at you like you've asked for his daughter's hand, his estate, and a duel all at once. A woman on a bench clutches her parasol to her chest as though you've just whispered sedition. You attempt to smile, but it's too late. You've violated one of the most deeply entrenched pillars of Victorian self-governance. Never let them see you lost. Because being lost is not about geography. It's about identity. Proper Victorians are never uncertain. They are born knowing directions, as if street maps are passed down through bloodlines. If one does not know the way, one simply invents a confident gait and walks briskly until arriving somewhere acceptably dignified. Asking for help is what travelers do. Outsiders, unreliables, people who wear colors before the Queen has endorsed them, people who are Irish, and now, congratulations, you are Irish, which wouldn't be so dangerous if this were just a matter of charming brogues and hearty stew. But this is Victorian England, where accents are measured in social, deviance and surnames are geopolitical threats. You, with your slightly winded voice and your public request for assistance, have triggered an ancestral alarm in everyone within earshot. You might as well have shouted, "Top of the morning," and started dancing a jig while liberating someone's sheep. A footman hurries past you as if your confusion is contagious. A child points. You are now a walking cautionary tale. And worse, someone is definitely writing about you in their diary, which means your reputation has approximately 6 hours to live. You try to recover. Never mind, you say, with as much British repression as you can manage. I'll simply carry on. But it's no use. You've spoken already. Your voice was too friendly, too open, too willing to bridge a gap that Victorians spend their entire lives widening. The damage is done. A vicar eyes you warily from across the road, sensing, perhaps, that you know how to ask for potatoes in Gaelic. The woman nearest to you begins murmuring something about suspicious origins and Catholic sympathies. You feel your social rank melting faster than a sugared biscuit in hot tea. To make matters worse, Someone actually answers your question. It's a young boy with a smudge on his cheek and the look of someone not yet beaten down by etiquette. He points down the street and says, 2 blocks that way, then left. He smiles. Now you've created an accomplice. By engaging in this interaction, you've dragged an innocent child into your scandal. He will be talked about at dinner. His mother will be questioned. The neighborhood will never trust him again, all because he spoke to someone who couldn't instinctively divine the location of the public reading room. You thank him anyway, quietly, and start walking in the direction he indicated, doing your best impression of someone whose ancestry is entirely local and whose boots were not purchased with foreign coin. But there's no undoing it. The street has judged you, and the judgment is permanent. You are now the person who asked for directions, and worse, you are someone who didn't know better than to know less, which, in Victorian England, might be the most foreign trait of all. Your only goal was to cool your face, a modest, dainty action, to swish a hand fan lightly at your temple and remind your pores who's in charge. That's it. But instead, you have just challenged the Earl of Montrose to mortal combat. You don't even realize it at first. The room is already thick with lace, champagne, and the heavy musk of tightly restrained feelings. The fan seemed like a harmless accessory, something to occupy your hands while your brain tried to remember which cousin you're not supposed to speak to since the inheritance incident of '72. But apparently, there is a language to this object, a dialect of subtlety and death, and you are speaking it in all the wrong verbs. You flapped the fan too quickly, then too slowly. Then you paused mid-air like a Victorian cobra sizing up its prey. You thought you were just fanning yourself. What you were actually doing was issuing a formal invitation to duel someone's honor into the next life. And now Lord Montrose is standing. He doesn't blink. He simply removes one glove, like peeling back the seal on a cursed scroll, and places it gently on a silver tray. His mustache twitches with purpose. A lady swoons at the edge of the rug, possibly from excitement, but more likely because you have shattered the delicate code of fan flirting that keeps this society from erupting into chaos. You attempt to correct course by smiling and fanning yourself more slowly, which is a tragic choice because now you've escalated things. What you thought meant, "I am overheated," has just translated to, "Your lineage is weak, and I shall end it by moonlight." Someone coughs pointedly behind a fern. Across the room, a widow lowers her lorgnette with a look that says she has. You've seen this play out before, and it ended in exile and possibly syphilis. You are now not just the center of attention, you are the eye of a very delicate, very embroidered hurricane. A butler approaches. He is carrying a tray, but on it lies only a single, ivory-handled dueling pistol. No one told him to do this. He simply understands that your fan gestures have reached the point of no return, and it's better to be prepared. You try to whisper to your companion that this is all a mistake, that you were merely hot and undereducated in fan semaphore, but she is already edging away from you as if your poor grasp of fan etiquette might be contagious. Your social capital is dissolving in real time. Montrose bows deeply. You're not sure if it's a threat or a farewell. It might be both. A lady to your left whispers, "Oh, it's just like Vienna," and presses a gloved hand to her heart. You are now international. Panicking, you fold the fan completely and hold it flat against your chest, as if that might nullify the whole misunderstanding. Unfortunately, this is widely understood to mean, "I will see you at dawn with pistols, sir." And now the pianist has stopped playing. A hush falls over the room. Tea cools. Lives are reconsidered. You wonder, briefly, how this moment will be recorded in the gossip columns, whether they'll call it a passionate misunderstanding or a deliberate act of fan-based aggression. Either way, you are now folklore. You think of throwing the fan out the window, but that, naturally, would indicate surrender, or a declaration of war, or, depending on the angle, a marriage proposal. There is no winning this. You simply nod to Montrose and hope that, in the dueling field of fate, your skirt doesn't catch on a root and embarrass you further. Because that would be the real scandal. Not murder by fan, but tripping with poor posture. The joke wasn't even that funny. A passing quip about the soup being tepid, delivered with a smile so faint it wouldn't startle a mouse. But alas, you've broken the unspoken vow of silence that binds this drawing room together more tightly than anyone's corset. A single, mild attempt at levity, and now you've committed social arson. It begins innocently. You reach for the bread. Someone mumbles something about the weather, and your lips, possessed by the dangerous spirit of casual conversation, say, "If the soup were any colder, I'd need to reintroduce myself to it." A harmless observation. In any sane society, it might earn you a chuckle. Here, it earns you paralysis. A teacup freezes mid-air. Lady Penshaw's monocle nearly dislodges. Somewhere across the room, someone inhales sharply, but forgets to exhale. You have just violated the sacred law of Victorian humor. Be clever, but never too quickly. Wit must meander, like a well-bred spaniel, not dart in unexpectedly like a street urchin with opinions. The gentleman beside you stiffens as if your sentence were a dual invitation in disguise. The Duchess of Barrowmere, who has not smiled since 1834, appears to blink in disbelief. The piano tinkles out a few unsure notes before giving up entirely. You have, quite clearly, said too much. You try to laugh it off. Big mistake. Now you're loud and irreverent. Laughter, here, is not a spontaneous burst of joy. It is a measured acknowledgement of shared restraint. A smile may be permissible if it's vague enough to pass for indigestion, but this moment of visible, audible amusement has placed you in the same category as jesters and possibly revolutionaries. Your aunt shifts uncomfortably in her seat. She doesn't look at you, which is how you know you've caused her real distress. The man across the table with the sideburns and the grim pocket watch looks as though he's considering whether you need to be escorted out or simply married off to an obscure cousin in the colonies. Someone coughs. You wonder if it's to break the silence or to signal for assistance. It's hard to say. This is a room where people once talked for 17 minutes about embroidery and called it stimulating. Your joke was a heat wave in a room designed for frost. You make the grave mistake of speaking again, an attempt to clarify that you were joking, which only confirms the worst. You thought this was a place where people might find things funny. Admitting humor aloud is tantamount to standing up and confessing that you enjoy reading novels and occasionally breathing with enthusiasm. The hostess smiles at you in the way one might smile at a horse about to be euthanized. Warm, yet deeply final. Conversation resumes carefully, nervously, but you've become part of the furniture now. Not in the comforting sense, but in the "we shall pretend you are not here" sense. You could start juggling butter knives or confess to being part French, and the reaction would be the same. Your joke lingers in the air, unwelcome and untouchable. No one repeats it, no one acknowledges it, but everyone remembers. You are now that person who made the soup remark. In some corners, that might elevate you to cult hero. Here, it means you'll never be seated next to anyone's daughter again. You chew your bread slowly, very slowly. You are now one with the silence. You embrace the neutral zone of polite non-existence, where your only goal is to escape this evening without further offense. Next time, you'll simply say, nothing. Or, if you must speak, perhaps offer a detailed weather report. Everyone loves a good barometric analysis. It's safer that way. You lean back slightly, not enough to slouch, not enough to lounge, just enough to suggest, for one microscopic moment, that your spine is not fused with moral purpose. And that's when you feel it, the sudden drop in temperature, despite the fire still crackling behind you. It's not the weather. It's judgment. You've relaxed, and now everyone sees you for what you truly are, a monster with joints. You thought you were safe. You made it through the door without tripping, remembered to say, "How do you do?" instead of "Hi," and have not once mentioned digestion. You even nodded at the right moment during the story about someone's second cousin's gout. You were doing well, better than well. You were blending. You were one of them. But then came the armrest. It seduced you with its polished wood and subtle curve, whispering promises of ease and maybe even a smidge of comfort. You placed your elbow there gently, reverently, and in doing so, sent a clear message to the entire room. You have abandoned the cause. Because relaxing in Victorian society isn't just a faux pas. It's treason against the invisible scaffolding holding civilization upright. Upright, like everyone else's posture, like Lady Weatherby's neck, currently stretched so taut you suspect it's supported by wires. Meanwhile, your body, now slightly angled and perilously near comfort, has been identified as a threat to national stability. Across the room, someone drops their teacup. Not dramatically, not even noticeably, just enough for the message to be clear. Decorum has been breached. Eyes flick toward you, not openly, never directly. These are glances honed by centuries of aristocratic side-eye. You feel them the way one feels a draft in a sealed room. You are suddenly colder than the sherry. You attempt a correction. Too late. Now you're fidgeting, which is worse. Movement implies discomfort. Discomfort implies awareness, and awareness implies guilt. You should have just remained reclined. At least then you could have pretended it was a spinal condition. The hostess asks if you're quite all right. It's not concern. It's a test. Because if you say, yes, you're lying. Someone who was truly all right would not have needed to be asked. But if you say no, you're unwell, and unwellness must be dealt with, possibly by isolating you in a carriage until your moral posture returns. You murmur something about the heat and instantly hate yourself. The fire is barely alive. Everyone knows this. You've not only failed the test of bodily discipline, you've insulted the house's climate control. Lord Pembroke clears his throat. The room stills. He's about to speak. You pray it's about tariffs or turnips, anything to reset the room. But no, he says. I remember a time when guests sat with purpose. A murmur of agreement rustles like taffeta. You have been summoned to the tribunal. Someone begins talking about posture as patriotism. You nod fervently, hoping to camouflage among the upright. You dare not speak. Words would wobble. Your nerves are louder than the conversation. You sip your tea with exaggerated caution, trying to signal that you are once again one of the faithful. But the damage is done. You were caught off guard by comfort. You let your bones breathe. And now, everyone's wondering if you'll be the next person to embrace socialism. Relaxation, they now believe, is the first step toward emotional transparency. And emotional transparency leads to riots, or worse feelings. You might as well have kicked off your shoes and asked about philosophy. You leave that evening with a new understanding. You can memorize the rules, recite the titles, wear the right gloves, and avoid scandalous elbows. But the moment you let yourself feel safe, even for 1 second, the illusion fractures. Because here, ease is suspicion, stillness is loyalty, and rest is for the dead. Preferably buried on the family estate, with excellent posture engraved on the headstone.